Sorry about that. I always have that weird stuff at the beginning of getting everything going. All right. Hello. We've got a few people watching. That's awesome. Okay. Great. All right. So just getting myself situated here. Hello. I am Sherry Kubinick, and I'm really grateful that you have decided to join me here. What I'm going to talk about today is the basis of what causes the vast majority of hurts and disagreements in marriage. And what that is about is expectations. So we're going to be talking about what are healthy expectations in marriage and where we go wrong in marriage that causes a lot of the problems. And I just have to get my screens fixed here. Apologies. Okay. Sorry, I got a lot going on here behind the scenes. Okay, so yes, so what we're talking about is healthy expectations in marriage and what causes problems and what we can do about it. So what I want you to get out of this today is a really good understanding about the different seasons of marriage and how those different seasons can be dramatically impacted by our expectations. So I want to provide a bit of perspective around what's okay to expect from your partner versus what is not okay to expect from your partner, and how to figure out the difference and what to do about it. So basically, if you want to have a meaningful and harmonious relationship, what you really need is to have a very clear handle around where your boundaries are around your expectations. So this topic, expectations, I would say is probably the biggest reason that a lot of people end up getting divorced, okay? So no matter what the problems are in your marriage, the reason that it's going to feel like a problem for you is because if you have a different expectation from your partner, it's very likely that your expectations are not going to be met. And this is huge because the other factor that is huge in this is that as marriage changes, expectations change, and if there's no communication around that, you get a lot of issues. And this is actually a huge reason why, they'll talk about that 7-year itch and why a lot of marriages actually fail around that time. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about what inspired this topic for me today. So I have this client, I absolutely adore her, as I do all my clients. And on a recent call with me, she was telling me that a story that very much broke my heart, but it broke her heart, okay? So a little bit of background, she and her husband are retired. She retired before him. They live in South Carolina. And she had sort of settled into that, retired life. She retired first, like I said. Then he retired, I think about 3 years later. So after he retired, he started fishing more. She doesn't fish, but he had joined a fishing club or something, I guess, nearby. He started doing day trips, and he was going to social events, etc., etc. So now, of course, she was really happy for him to be fishing and stuff, and she was happy for him to start doing more of those sorts of things. But as time went on, about 6 months into his retirement, she started to really wonder where she was supposed to fit in to his retirement plan. So the particular story that she was telling me about was really hurting her, and it was an example of an unmet expectation, was that he had gone to some lunch event or something with his fishing club, and she had really expected him to be home at about 2:30, but he didn't get home until about 3:30, so it was about an hour late. When he got home, she tried to really talk to him calmly, and and of course she's thinking, I did all the right things, I was communicating nicely, and whatever. So she's trying to talk to him calmly about how it bothers her that he didn't even call, and he didn't let her know that he was going to be late. So, and then she of course went on to also tell him, to sort of take it to that next level and tell him that she feels that she's not even he doesn't involve her in anything. She's not involved in his retirement. She doesn't even feel like they're married anymore, right? So it kind of took this, you were late getting home from this lunch thing with your fishing group to where's our marriage going, right? And many of you can relate to that around how we take one thing and we make it mean everything. And of course, when that happens, it's because we've let a lot of things kind of add up for us. So this is a really good example of a marriage where expectations had gone unmet for a long time and there hadn't been a lot of great communication around it. So what she had in her head about what retirement should look like was different than what he had thought about retirement, obviously. So she had kind of pictured them spending their days together, probably that he would help out more around the house because, I mean, why wouldn't he now that he doesn't work anymore, right? So he, however, did not have that same idea. He entered retirement really excited about more time to do the things that he liked. He was going to go fishing, do a bit more golf, spend more time with his buddies, all of that. And he really didn't expect anything to change in terms of his relationship with his wife. So she had been cleaning and cooking and doing, everything around the house for a number of years, even when they were both working. And she had been doing most of that on her own. I think before he retired, he traveled quite a bit. So in his mind, well, why would anything change? Why wouldn't that just continue? Because in his mind, nothing was changing for her just because he was retiring. So in that particular instance, he's thinking, I've never been home at 2:30 before when I was working. So what difference does it make if I'm an hour late? I'm not going to call her about it. So these are two very valid and very innocent expectations, yet she's over here feeling brokenhearted and lonely. And then after she talks to him for the first time in 6 months about this, he's now frustrated and basically telling himself his wife's always mad at him and he can't do anything right and he doesn't understand what's wrong with her. So let's back this up, the same type of example up to earlier years of marriage. Okay, so those with littles, for example. So when you're in that time frame with little kids. So I'll tell you, for many couples, that period, and even little kids, you can break that down from the baby stage to toddlers to, kind of preschool to the next stage. But those years with small children for many couples are very, very, very tough years of marriage. And I hate to see couples break up during those years. Many times, I always say some marriages shouldn't, but many times when it's those early years, and there's little kids involved, it's often growing pains for the parents that can be dealt with if you get help versus ending the marriage and giving that up because you're thinking that everything is your partner's fault or that there's no way that the two of you can ever get on the same page. Because in these years, this is where you really start to see what expectations have been brought into the relationship. And so often when people are dating, and I know a lot of people, they'll say, well, we did pre-marriage counseling. My first husband and I, we did pre-marriage counseling too, with the church. And, and we ask questions like, well, how much money can you spend without asking? I remember that one, and again, I'm not dissing pre-marriage counseling. I think it's great, but it doesn't often really go deep into how things are going to look or what those expectations are. I remember that particular question because I remember, I think my answer at the time was $100, that I should be able to spend $100 without asking. And I think his answer was like 1,000. So we were definitely on different pages there. Not that ever caused issues with us, but so pre-marriage counseling is good because it asks some of those sort of very surface level questions, but there's a lot more depth, and certainly those first few years of marriage, you start to see all of the things that you didn't necessarily expect or all of the differences that you didn't necessarily realize that you had. So this is where you're looking at, what is considered expected rules in a relationship. Many of you might remember that show. I was thinking about it earlier on, that show, John and Kate Plus 8. So it was on TLC, I don't know, 15 years ago probably. And I just loved it. I loved that show. So if you don't remember that show, it was about this couple who had 8 kids. It's probably still available on Netflix or something. And I remember in one episode, she was talking about how John always filled her car up with gas. And I remember her saying, that's just what men do, right? Like, don't all husbands make sure their wife's car always has gas? So another great example of, because to me that was shocking. It was like, I would never consider or expect my husband was always going to be filling my car up with gas. Although I did like the idea, and I do now ask Darcy often to take my car to fill it up with gas, because who doesn't want to give that job away? But it's an example of an expectation that, she was like, well, my dad always did that, so I just expect that my husband's always going to do that. And for some couples, these sorts of things really cause problems. Another one is expectations around sex. How often? How long should it last? How crazy should it be? All of this is stuff that couples argue about. And especially when kids come along, and then you've got a child, a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old knocking on a bedroom door at 10 p.m. because they've had a bad dream or whatever, and they're kind of interrupting a bit of private time. What are you going to do about that? People have different expectations. Your partner might think you need to put the child back in bed. You might think, no, I need to, comfort them and bring them in here with us and let them sleep here in the bed with us, ending the private time. So these are the sorts of things that can cause a lot of rifts between a couple in the early years, but certainly issues around sex, those issues last all through marriage if you're not great at communicating your expectations around that. Then we get into the teenage years, of course, and for some people, some couples will say, oh no, we were great during the little kid years. And usually when I hear that, it's because one parent took the sort of default role of parenting and the other parent stepped aside and let one kind of do all the parenting. And so there were no issues with that because, one person kind of stepped aside and thought, well, I'll just let her do it or I'll just let him do it. Okay, so I mean, in the vast majority of cases, it is the mom who will become that default parent and kind of has the larger say in how kids are parented. Now, when you get into those teenage years, you see different expectations rise. So this is where I often see couples really getting into big arguments around what should be expected from the kids and how to parent them when the kids don't meet expectations. So, if one of you had really controlling parents, you might think, well, this is the way to go. And, this is where you hear stuff like, well, when I was growing up, right? I have one couple that I work with, and he very much equates respect with doing what you're told. So, she doesn't see it that way. She doesn't kind of expect the kids to not have an opinion or to just always toe the line. She has a little bit more grace when it comes to them. So this has become a huge issue in their marriage, and one that can often overtake. So parenting issues become marriage issues if a couple lets them, right? So this can be, a very heavy and complex time, those teenage years, because often this is when, if one parent was default parent, during those teenage years, the other parent will step in and maybe feel a little bit more stressed out or frustrated because the expectations are higher for what the kids should be doing or not doing in the house. Now, this is also when in blended families, it can be even worse, because I'm telling you, if you have children, you are not always creating an easier future for yourself or for your kids if you end your marriage. So, and again, there's many marriages that should end, and I celebrate the end of many marriages because sometimes it's what's best for everyone. But it is very, very important to be very clear on that decision, because it is a critical one if you're considering divorce. and you're bringing, and there's children involved, because certainly if you move into a second relationship after that, and you're, bringing their kids and your kids together, or just your kids and whatever, that those issues around parenting can be even more complex when the family is blended. So in my experience, a large majority of marriages can heal and become quite happy, to be honest, if you develop the right skills that are needed for a happy marriage. And of course, this is what I teach over in Relationships Redone. We talk about, how you show up, why you show up the way you do, what energy it creates between you and your partner, how to shift that energy, so that if you decide that you want to leave, you're making the right choice. And if you decide you want to stay, you can feel clear and confident in that decision, and you can feel confident that a lot of the issues, or the way that you were dealing with a lot of the stress prior that was not working, that you've got new tools and a different perspective on how to deal with that. So then we get into that empty nest stage. And so this is when your kids have grown up, maybe they're off to university, but you're not yet retired. And so of course, depending on what age you have kids, this stage of your life can be 10 or more years. And for most people, they think life should just keep getting better. And absolutely, I agree. Life should continue to get better. So if you're doing it right, these can be really, really fantastic years for your marriage. And I'll tell you why, because this is when, and again, this is in a perfectly, and what we want to see as a typical situation for a marriage, and not that there is such a thing, but for many couples, this is when maybe you've got a little bit more money than you did 20 years prior. Your careers have been a bit more established. You've been working, you're earning. You've definitely established that sense of purpose in terms of your contribution from that career standpoint, or you've started a business or whatever. The kids maybe have moved out, so you aren't dealing quite so much with those teenage years anymore. In other words, that kind of empty nest stage can be, for many people, not everyone, it can be less outer stress bringing, on the marriage. So there's maybe a little bit less kid stress. There's a little bit less financial stress, perhaps. And sometimes that is what creates a happier marriage. But the problem is, and I'll talk a little bit about that actually can also be the problem, because if your marriage, in order for your marriage to be happy, if that needs to be based on less stress or less outer stress, then you haven't understood the assignment of marriage. Because the assignment of marriage is that as the outer stress comes in, the two of you work on that together. Not that in order for the two of you to be happy, there can't be any other stress in your life. So of course, now we land ourselves in the retirement years. And like I mentioned with my first example, this can bring a whole host of issues. So if you don't have a solid plan for what those years are going to look like for you, then it can be extremely sad and an extremely lonely time of life, because people, again, have big expectations about what retirement is going to look like. So if they get to that point where they feel lucky enough to be able to retire, and then they find themselves with all the same problems, only worse, and they're even more lonely because now they don't have a sense of purpose. They're not leaving the house every day to go do something. They're putting all of the pressure on their partner to make them happy. This is when you are going to find yourself in a difficult situation from a marriage standpoint in retirement. So many people think that what causes these big problems in marriage is the unmet expectations, but that's not totally true, because what causes the problem is when there is judgment applied to the unmet expectation. So when one of you steps into the role of critic, that is where the problem begins. So in the example I shared earlier about my client from South Carolina, she had an idea about what her husband should be doing, right? And so the fact that he hadn't called, and the fact that he had been spending a lot of time fishing and with his fishing buddies and that sort of thing, they hadn't discussed any of that. So she had this idea that what he was doing was wrong. She was applying her judgment. And I'm not saying, by the way, that she shouldn't have an expectation around that. It's not about should or shouldn't. It's about, where is this expectation coming from, and has it been communicated? Does he understand it? Because the worst thing that you can do is, if you're one of those people, and I'm calling you out, if you're one of those people who says, well, he should just know, or she should just know. I'm telling you, that's a problem. That is not just, I have this expectation, but that you should know my expectation and you should meet my expectation, right? And that's a whole nother level of problems that, or reasons to create problems in your marriage. So the more shoulding that happens on you or in your marriage, like, you shouldn't be an hour late, or you should let me know if you're going to be an hour late. You should make sure the kids clean out the cutlery drawer, or, our 15-year-old should have a summer job. You should make more money. You shouldn't work so much. All of these things, that's all about the judgment being applied. So it's now become a case of, I believe something is right, which means I believe the way you're doing it is wrong. Okay? Now you've created a situation in your relationship where it's you versus me. And anytime one or both of you are arguing in this way, you're both in the wrong. Okay? Because when this happens, you're making the problem worse by applying your expectations and judgments onto your partner in a way that is only going to cause them to want to defend their position. And this is very much, and again, we talk a lot about this in Relationships Redone. This is very much an energy thing, because the minute that you tell somebody else that they're wrong, the minute you apply a judgment to them, tell them what they should be doing, which energetically tells them that the way they are doing it was wrong, what you've done is you've put them on the defense, right? So unless they've got some very clearly established and high level skills and self-awareness, and most people don't, around this, they are going to immediately get triggered into a position where they're going to deflect. So something like, well, you were gone to the greenhouse last week for 4 hours. I didn't know where you were. Right? So now we're talking about something totally different, but so that's a deflection. Or they're going to defend themselves and dig their heels in as to why it's okay for them to be an hour late and not call. So nothing good is going to come from that approach, because you've now created a negative energy between you that is never going to lead anywhere positive. Okay? So instead, what I want you to consider there's 3 questions you can ask yourself when there's an expectation in your marriage that hasn't been met. And so I call this the expectation umbrella, and it's considered an umbrella because it protects you, or protects your partner and your marriage from all of the shoulding, right? That's actually working to really hurt both of you and destroy the marriage. So the first question that creates that expectation umbrella is, where did this expectation come from? Where did my expectation come from? So what is the experience or the idea that I've had or lived through that created a belief around this? So most of the time, we don't even know what beliefs we have because we've never questioned them. So again, in the example of my client, her husband's an hour late, or her expectations around what retirement should look like. When you start to question that, when she starts to question that, it's like, okay, well, why did you think that it was going to look this certain way? And it's like, well, when, my parents retired, they did this, this, and this. And so that's what I thought we would do. And of course, he's thinking, well, but when my parents retired, this is what it looked like. Or maybe his parents didn't retire. Maybe one of them passed away younger and didn't have the gift of those retirement years. And so he doesn't have anything to go by in terms of what that would look like. So he's just going by and living his life, right? So knowing where an expectation comes from is really important, because what that does is it allows you to become aware, I guess, of whether or not, and we'll get into this with number 3, but it's about whether or not you feel that you really need to hold on tightly to that expectation exactly as it sits. And I'll get into a more extreme example here in a second too. So the second thing to ask yourself when an expectation hasn't been met is, what is your partner's belief around it? And if you're asking yourself this, so this is a great exercise, by the way, to do with your partner. But if you have a partner who doesn't like to get into these sorts of discussions, and that's okay, because try not to push it on them, because usually that makes things worse. But it at least opens your mind up to figuring out and trying to understand where your partner is coming from. And if you're answering it in your mind for your partner, really be careful that you're answering this in a fair and peaceful way to yourself, so that you can kind of create a little bit more open-heartedness around it. Because again, you're always wanting to find that energy that helps love guide you, right? So if I were to say, if you were to say to yourself, well, what is my partner's expectations around cleaning the house? And then if I'm answering for my partner, because I'm not talking to them about it, and I say something like, well, he just expects me to do everything. Okay, so that is coming from a place of anger. This is not going to create within you the openness and the guidance. You're not tuning in to that inner guidance, because your inner guidance doesn't feel like anger. Your inner guidance feels like love. So when you're asking this question, what is my partner's belief around this? What you want to do is you want to make sure that you're not answering in a way that's actually just digging your own heels in for your own position, because that's not, you might as well just give up, because that's not going to get you anywhere. And number 3 is about, are we both willing to open our minds up to a more loving approach? So this is a way, as I said, when you're asking this question, trying to understand where this belief system came from, where this expectation came from, it allows you to give your partner a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. It allows you to question your own motives behind your expectations, and what you're making your partner responsible for versus what you're responsible for. And it helps to create that safety and freedom that your relationship needs to be based on. So all happy relationships are based on safety and freedom. So that means I am free to be myself, and I am safe with you in that, which means I can be myself without being attacked. And what a lot of people worry about is the first thing that comes to mind around this, they'll say, well, what, I'm just supposed to, let my partner get away with everything? But what you'll find is the more you allow your partner to be themselves, and the more you try to accept and love them for who they are, the more you will start to see a shift in them, where they are more open to being influenced a little bit by you in a different way. So if you're always trying to change your partner, if you're trying to parent them or teach them a lesson, you're always going to have your partner digging their heels in, and the likelihood of influencing them or changing some of their expectations is very, very low. Now, obviously, it's very important that you get clear on what is okay for you to accept, what expectations you want to hold on to, and what you cannot hold on to. So I had a client a couple years ago, and I think this is a great example of this exact process, because her husband had cheated. So she had found out that her husband had cheated on her many, many times. And now, when we're applying this, so obviously her expectation had not been met. She did not expect her husband to cheat on her, and she expected him to be faithful to their marriage, because they didn't have an open relationship. They had never discussed that. That wasn't, that, because I mean, I understand a lot of people have those relationships and each to their own. This was not the case with her. Her expectation was definitely fidelity. And so her expectation had not been met. Now, obviously, when she's asking herself, well, where did this expectation come from? And am I willing to let it go? The answer was a very clear no for her. And that's okay. It's okay to know where you've got strict boundaries around your expectations. Now, when she was able to talk to him about this and ask the question, where did his beliefs around this come from? She was shocked and dismayed to realize that he believed all men cheated. So because of his upbringing, his father, other men in his life, he really believed that most men cheat and that it was kind of to be expected. And if you got caught, you'd sweep it under the rug, because that had been what had been demonstrated in his life for his entire life. And so, and these sorts of, definitely when it comes to fidelity and infidelity, those sorts of things can kind of be run in families, I guess you'd say, only in the sense that those belief systems and the expectations move generation after generation. And this can also be more prevalent in certain cultures, okay? So to understand your own expectations and try to understand your partner's expectations does not mean that you don't have boundaries. It's the exact opposite. When you understand yours and you really start to question yourself, that actually often can give you even more resolve in what you expect and what you are going to hold strong as your boundaries in terms of what allows you to be in the happiest marriage for you. And this is where, as you're working through, marriage issues, you can start to see, is this a marriage problem or is this a divorce problem? Because often it becomes very clear when there's something that you will absolutely not accept in your marriage, and through discussion or communication in a healthy way with your partner, you discover that your partner is absolutely not going to join you in that expectation. Then it comes to this point of, okay, so then what's next, right? And how do we move through those next steps? One last thing before I finish this off is that the goal as you're moving through these various seasons of life isn't that everyone's expectations are always going to be the same, or that everyone's expectations are always going to be met. It's that expectations are going to change. Women I work with, I mean, most of my clients are in their 40s and 50s, and how they show up at 45, 55, 65 years old is very different, because we grow and expand. And I mean, of course, men do as well. We grow and expand and change. And some of the things that we maybe had as expectations or were willing to, the way we showed up when we were 25, it should be very different by the time you're 45. And along the way, you might have changed your expectations or changed how you want to be or show up, but maybe you didn't communicate that with your partner. And sometimes that's the biggest challenge, is just helping your partner to understand who you are now. And often it's about also being open to understanding who your partner is now. So the goal is never to sort of have no stress. Certainly it's never to have no external stress. The external stress helps you grow and expand. The goal is always to get really great at dealing with these things together. And that's what makes that stress and anxiety have much less power over you and over your marriage, because life is always going to keep on lifing. And if you're not growing in your ability to figure this stuff out, the older you get, the longer you're married, you're simply making yourself sort of into a victim of whatever life throws at you. And then you've given up all of your power. And, the cautionary word I always talk, or tale I always tell, is you can leave this marriage, but you take yourself with you when you go. And if you haven't figured out some of these skills, how to deal with unmet expectations, how to understand yourself in a different way so that you can really consciously decide and live in an awareness of what you really want out of life, the next relationship is going to be just as bad or worse. And then other areas of your life will follow. So that's what I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed it. Is there any comments or questions? I see over in the Facebook group, we've got a number of people here. Sometimes there's a bit of a delay for comments or questions. I don't see any there. Okay. Well, as always, thank you so much for being here. And any questions you have, please, you can put them in the comments below. If you're watching on YouTube, thanks for being here. Like and subscribe. Share this with your friends. Don't keep secrets. And put comments below, and I will try to get to those comments and questions as well. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.